Today we're in the Chapel of Nativity here at Grace Cathedral with Anna Rossi. Anna Rossi, along with her colleague Jared Johnson, are the real heroes at Grace Cathedral these days after the huge consecration of a new bishop service that we had on May 4th. And it was an amazing day, tons of details, and everybody keeps saying, you gotta thank Anna, or give her a raise, or take her out to dinner and buy her chocolates, all these things. But congratulations on an amazing service.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Really, it was a privilege to work on it.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Tell me a little bit about what a precenter is and what a precenter does.
Sure thing. I think every worshiping community has liturgy, but cathedrals have liturgy on a certain scale. And so precenter is really the person who's responsible for how we pray together. That includes everything from like little tiny offices of morning prayer to festivals like the consecration or Sunday at 11. Thinking about oftentimes not just what are the words, what is the text that we use, or what is the structure of the rite, but how do we move in the space, and how does the text we say sit alongside the music that we sing, things like that.
Yeah. Well, I wonder. I've got two questions that kind of naturally arose. One is, are there models of precentors that you know of in the past history that kind of inform what it is that you do? And the other question is more like what are the questions that liturgists are struggling with these days?
Sure. So I think those two questions are really related to one another.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
So this cathedral has a rich history of precentors, many of whom I have worked closely with.
Right.
And so, but we also had someone who was here for a very brief period of time who had served as a liturgist in the Church of England.
Right,
Justin. And so thinking about sort of the inheritance that we have from Mark Stanger and Jeffrey Hokum, but also how that is different from the way cathedrals in England, for example, operate. So I think a lot about how we are sort of on a frontier. At the one point, we're an anchor in a tradition, but we're always pushing the edge a little faster than our cousins in England are. And I think we have sometimes some different commitments because we're not a state church. We understand that part of our responsibility is to the region, like it would be in England, but also to sort of cultivating the edge of the Christian imagination.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. It's like reimagining church right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that department of figuring out what it is that we say and do and the ritual gestures that we use in worship, is it really at the heart of that?
It is. It absolutely is. And I think that really connects us to what those frontiers are, because there are places where our wider culture is longing for meaning, and we have tools to bring to those questions that give things a ritual context that they might not otherwise have. The thing that kind of is brewing in my mind right now is something like Trans Day of Visibility. So on the one hand, that's a secular observance out in the culture. On the other hand, it has deep resonance with some core Christian values and some things that we as a cathedral community have decided to take a stand for. And so how do we look to the riches of our tradition to draw out those things that are affirmative of people who are learning how to live their most authentic and frankly truest Christian selves out in the world, and become communities that nurture and support that and affirm those journeys.
Yeah, I love that, because we believe so deeply in the dignity of every single human being without exception, and that certainly has to find expression in the worship that we enjoy together.
It must.
Yeah. One of the saddest things about Grace Cathedral, which I hate to even say because I don't want everybody else to notice it, is that so much of the cathedral was built in the 1950s and early 1960s. So all those stained glass windows don't have equal representations of women and men, unlike the older windows, which have women in them. But I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just the way that women's leadership, really rising in its importance and ascendancy in the 1970s, like just how that affects the work that you do as a liturgist, as a precentor.
Absolutely. So I think, there are some traditions, Roman Catholics come to mind immediately, who don't have a history. We have a history. We have people who have paved the way, some of whom were very local, and then we have a layer of scholarship on top of that. So on the one hand, I feel like I am in a position of particular privilege in holding the role that I do, which has not been held in its form by a woman previously.
Right.
It tells me that there are still, I don't want to say barriers to break, but there's still ground to expand upon.
Yes.
But we stand, I think of somebody like Ruth Myers, who comes as a priest and a scholar and has had occasion to really dig into the roots of how we worship and to identify those places of common humanity, and then call us to be missional in light of those roots. And so that's the kind of inheritance that I have, that generations before me didn't have, and also our compatriots in other traditions.
Yeah, I think of Ellen Clark King, our former vice dean, who, she was in the first year of women being ordained. I mean, she faced these tremendous barriers and just did it with so much grace.
Yeah, and also she talks about how it was scary.
Right.
I mean, they were
exactly.
afraid for their well-being on the day of their ordination, and I had none of those fears. I had an extraordinary community of love around me.
Yeah, and I was just even thinking last time you were preaching, I told you the story where there are two women sitting in the chairs right here, and as soon as you got up to the pulpit, they just started walking out. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're walking out because there's a woman in the pulpit. And then they went and sat in the front row because they wanted to see you better. Like, that's the new world that I'm experiencing, and I'm so grateful for, because spirituality needs to reflect the way that we begin to really understand every person's dignity.
Absolutely.
I know that you're interested in academic discussions, like intellectual discussions, like the American Academy of Religion. And what are some interesting papers or ideas that you've learned from those theorists?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite volumes is a collection of essays that looks at how people do ritual activities interreligiously. So we're very clear, like when we get together on Sunday morning, here's how we celebrate the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And that's a well-paved road, both for Christians broadly and for us in particular. That particular intersection where we say, how do we get together not just as people talking in parallel, but as people from diverse traditions engaged in common ritual activity that is constructive. That, for me, is a real horizon for the work that is set before us. Some of that work happens, almost an accident. Not even an accident's not the right way to say it.
Yeah.
But we have experiences.
You have an occasion, and in order to mark the occasion, you have to have this cooperation between these different religious bodies.
Absolutely, it's those sort of formal things, but it's also, there are some scholars, for example, who have studied patterns of pilgrimage that are interreligious in their context. So Christians, Muslims, and Jews going to a particular site in Turkey and performing common rituals that were not prescribed by any of their traditions, but then demand some sort of kind of scholarly reflection about how is this ritual interreligious in its core, and therefore something that could be of help when we need to do those occasions.
That's one of the things I love too, is like you're so interested in interfaith dialogue, and it's just such a core part of your ministry. On the occasions when you're basically preaching a kind of sermon, a dharma talk at yoga, what is going through your head? What are your goals when you're trying to address like a yoga community?
Absolutely. I think about that community, and I don't know what they're thinking. It's not like Sunday at 11 where I look out and I think, okay, well, I might know what that person has in mind. This is, to me, it feels kind of tabula rasa. And what I want to be able to express in that moment is, first of all, that there's a place for each of them in this community, in this place, and that faith traditions can be in conversation in their particularity. So it's not simply that, you know, all beings are spiritual and we can stop there, but that there are these particular expressions in, say, Thich Nhat Hanh, for example.
Right.
And I think you were talking about mindfulness this
right,
week.
Exactly.
So there's a particular way that Thich Nhat Hanh expresses this that has resonance with the ways that Merton did, for example, and that we can really dig deeply into those roots and into that particularity to find the commonality. It doesn't have to be watered down. It can actually be quite concentrated and therefore very rich.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested, and I love that we've talked about this. I'm going to see that practice in a different way. I mean, it's just something I'm constantly trying to learn how to do better, and learn what it is that we're doing anyway. But I think you're right. I think a basic message is that every human being has this extraordinary dignity, that we're all loved by God, that we're all invited into a kind of a deeper relation to God too, and that there is this kind of imperative for us to try to be more forgiving of one another, you know,
and to learn more about like my, you know, we should learn what makes Malcolm Malcolm.
Yeah.
And that's part of engaging with a person's dignity, and holding it with a sense of reverence.
Yeah. Well, Anna, I'm so grateful you're taking. I know you're so busy. Thanks for taking the time.
Pretty busy too. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Malcolm.
Yeah. So this is Anna Rossi, and I'm Malcolm Young. Thanks for watching More Good News.